Coverage of the Detroit Grand Prix is brought to you by the members of the DL 500 Club. Click the link in the description and join today. So welcome to the Goofy Pit Lane here in Detroit. Fun weekend until it wasn't a fun weekend. And I guess, tell me where you've heard this one before. You start with a chassis that is almost completely indestructible. You could drop an atomic bomb on it and it would keep going. You pair that with a racetrack design that has one real good actual passing zone, and then you put the restart zone just before that one passing zone and have a whole bunch of restarts and a whole bunch of yellows and expect that it's not going to be what we saw today in Detroit. Now, before I really, throw some bees out there, let's give some honey, because I felt like this race, the Detroit fans have been great. The Detroit area has been awesome. I discovered some new food thanks to Mark Janes. Shout out to the Green Dot, fantastic restaurant. There were a lot of happy, joyful, knowledgeable racing fans here. And from that perspective, there were a lot of people that I'm glad got to see a race. The organizers have done a good job with this race outside of the racetrack design. We'll get back to that, but I think the new winner's circle is fantastic. It's kind of exactly the answer to the complaints that Zach Brown was making. It feels and looks legit. It looks great. The other thing that's really cool about Detroit, I wasn't here last year, remember. I was at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It's really cool to get up on top of a parking garage and watch Indy cars from a perspective that essentially only VIPs get in places like Long Beach and St. Pete. So I think that's cool. The issue is that, really the issue is twofold. The driving standards are the worst I think I've ever seen in IndyCar. Just no respect for the cars and the danger of racing as fast as they do. No respect for the equipment or the crews that work on these race cars. It was just total bumper cars, as bad as I've ever seen it. And, it's not totally on the drivers. It is a lot of it down to the track design. The decision, and again, they're trying to work within, the Renaissance Center behind us, which of course Chevy's leaving in 2025, but at least for now they're working within the confines of keeping the Renaissance Center, the GM World Headquarters, a part of this racetrack. But yeah, the circuit design just does not lend itself to anything except for dive bomb passes and crashes. And if it's not that, it's more or less single file, not a lot of action. And I say all of this because it kind of goes back to a video that I did earlier this week where I kind of asked, well, why does the interest level fall off the Indy 500? And there's a lot of reasons, or after the Indy 500, and there's a lot of reasons for that, right? It's not just one-fold or two-fold. It's not just because of one reason or the other. I think the fact that the race is on USA Network after the Indy 500 is a big one. But if you tuned in to the Indy 500 and then you tuned into this race, what did you see? Almost nothing that was anywhere similar to what the 6 million folks watched on last Sunday. And it's not even just the fact that, oh, it's a street course. No, that's not the issue. I think if Long Beach was the race after Indy, then you'd have a little bit more of similarity between, what the viewing audience saw at Indy and what the viewing audience saw here at Detroit. And I guess I just sit there and say, the last 50 laps of Indy was about as pure racing as you could get. And the full 100 laps here at Detroit were about as far away from the racing that I want to see as you could get. And it was it's hard to put into words without being just like excessively negative. And I don't necessarily, believe it or not, I don't want to just sit here and be negative, because I think Detroit is a great city. I think there were a lot of race fans here and people who maybe haven't checked out racing before who checked out this race, and a lot of people had a good time. But I did hear, throughout the weekend, whether it was IMSA or IndyCar, I would stand next to people and they, you could tell they were a little bit novice at racing one way or the other, and they would say, well, they're not really passing on this circuit, or wow, there's a lot of yellows, and And there was definitely frustration as the yellows kept going on and more cars were getting turned. And yeah, man, it disappoints me. It disappoints me because I think the series is better than what was put on today. And I think there are better ways to showcase what these drivers can do. And, you know, the contrast, like I said, is the last 50 laps of the Indy 500 compared to 100 laps in Detroit. I think that's the best way I can say it. And you had your best showcase for what the series is and the worst showcase of what the series is. So, yeah, we'll talk about it a little bit later. I do want to lighten the mood just a little bit because I got an interview that I'm pretty sure nobody else got, but I was really excited to get it. After the race, most of the drivers were pretty upset for many of the reasons that I just mentioned. But I did speak to a driver who was not the Indianapolis 500, and in fact hasn't been in an IndyCar since 2015, Tristan Vautier. This is what he had to say after his 18th place finish today.
Your day. Yeah, it was complete chaos out there. Everybody was going nuts. I mean, I guess it's so hard to pass that, you know, you got to be aggressive to make some stuff happen, but try to stay out of trouble. Kind of managed to. The team took a gamble on strategy, which I think was smart. We didn't manage to pull it off. We were missing a few laps to make it to the end on fuel, and we had to double stint those greens, or almost double stint them, and it was just undrivable at the end. There was just, I think they were down to the court. So gave it a good go. Didn't work out. P18. I think it was I'd been out of an IndyCar on the road course for 8 years, so I think I did a decent job for a comeback, and I hope Dale puts me back in the car soon, and we'll see what happens.
So let's talk a little bit about today's race and give some shout outs to some guys who did actually a good job today. I mean, obviously the winner, Scott Dixon. This is the exact type of race that Scott Dixon typically wins. When it's chaos and everybody else is making mistakes and everybody else is doing everything in their power to do things the wrong way, Scott Dixon typically does things the right way, and that's what we saw today. Marcus Ericsson, I thought, drove a brilliant race to second place today. You know, I think he was the only driver that wasn't really saving fuel towards the end of the race, and it showed. But Marcus needed that for sure. He needed a recovery after a really rough start to the season, and particularly a rough month of May. So good for Marcus Ericsson, a good setup for the rest of the season. Marcus Armstrong, another podium finish for him, just kind of quietly working up to good finishes here in IndyCar. I guess I said another podium. This is the first points-paying podium. He had one at Thermal, but you know, your mileage may vary on what people think about that particular podium. Will Power, who got turned around at the very start of the race, I believe, I don't know how many penalties he got, but it was a whole lot of penalties, and somehow manages a top 6 finish. So great for Will Power, because I thought he was down and out. A driver that had a couple of drivers had very disappointing days today. Colton Herta was one of them. Last car in the lead lap. Another thing where Herta's at the front and doesn't execute. Gets, you know, knocked behind the race. Pelot the same way, although Pelot didn't make a mistake on his own. Joseph Newgarden, his pit crew was definitely off their game today, and then Newgarden himself made a mistake, got into the wall, bent the toe link. And it's kind of funny, you know, we talk about all this contact and not a single car out of the race due to contact. The only car out of the race was Christian Rasmussen, who blew an engine. That's another Chevy, if we're keeping the tally going on who's blowing engines between Chevy and Honda. Again, thanks to the manufacturers for actually pushing the limits. We appreciate that, and we will not say anything negative about Chevy for that. It happens in big-time auto racing. Sometimes mechanical failures happen. The thing that I thought was probably the most fascinating part of this race was a part of the race where race control kind of I didn't think did a good job at all. I'll go ahead and just go full bird here. Didn't do a good job at all of managing any part of the rain. The race should have gone green about 5 laps before it did, and then the drivers, of course, decided to have their annual crash down into the hairpin over there. But you know, race control really can't control that outside of my suggestion, which is next year in Detroit, every car that crashes, I don't care if it was their fault or not, just yank them off the track, park them, and then we'll actually have a real race maybe here. But yeah, I think a lot of the teams overthought the rain, particularly the 26 and 10 teams, and the 45 and 27 teams actually didn't overthink it. So You know, it was a cloud burst. Yeah, the track got wet, but it was dry on half of the circuit, and the fact that IndyCar kept the race green as long as they did, or the race yellow as long as they did, it certainly helped the drivers who chose the dry tires. I saw a lot of suggestions on social media about, you know, what to do about this race. At least based on the IMSA schedule for next year, this is going to remain virtually identical, so get ready for that after the Indy 500 next year. The reason they moved from Belle Isle is because the city and the folks who live here year-round wanted to use Belle Isle and wanted to use it in the prime season, and they were complaining. There were complaints about Belle Isle being not able to be used, a large portion of that island, for a long part of the summer, and I guess I understand that. It's definitely a better racetrack than this, and you know me, I'm not going to say too many nice things about Belle Isle. I mean, again, you know, I have heard a suggestion from one of my friends in Milwaukee back in the month of May that you know, again, it's kind of a traditionalist thing to say, but move Milwaukee back to the traditional post-Indy date and move this to Labor Day weekend. Maybe you get some labor unions on board and sponsor it. I could see. I mean, again, you know, the fan in me, and I got to say that fan word very, very quietly. You know, the only place where I see the drivers respect each other anymore in this modern era of IndyCar racing is on the super speedways. I think that's why those races are so good. And I mean, you know, if I were elected king tomorrow, and haha, you don't get elected king, but you know, why can't we go back to Michigan? Even if it's not a 500-mile race, you know, how about a 200-mile, then a 500-mile in the fall? Why not? We'll go there twice. We went to the Indy road course twice for 5 years. Let's go to Michigan twice. I don't know. But yeah, I think that it's unfortunate that there was such a huge contrast, more of a contrast than just a typical street race. I mean, this didn't look anything like the Indy 500. And, you know, the last time they ran on Detroit on USA Network, there were more people in attendance at the Indy 500 than watched it on TV. I hope in the very least, with all the drama surrounding Santino Ferrucci, and say what you will about him, a star doesn't have to be a good guy. And I think that Santino's definitely got some star power in this series, like him or hate him. So that's good. Good for Santino. And you know, some of the chirping that happened before the race and then during the race, NASCAR fans like crashes. Maybe they tuned into it for the crashes. I know that's not the kind of race I like to see, though. So definitely a thumbs down for me here. Not to the organizers specifically, but perhaps to the track designer and to the drivers who were kind of put in that box, and to, you know, the idea to put a restart zone in a place where, you know, you have to make a desperate braking move, otherwise you're not going to get around somebody. So yeah, man, a little bit of a bird down. But, you know, the rest of the season will be exciting. There's some cool things coming up. I'm definitely looking forward to the return to Milwaukee, and I'm definitely looking forward to Nashville as the season finale. I think that's going to be really cool. I'm not going to be in Road America on site next weekend, although I do have an opportunity. We'll see. I don't want to say anything before anything's signed, but I might actually – I was planning on just staying home next weekend, but I did a little bit of business in the paddock this weekend, and there's a possibility that I'll be at a different racetrack covering a different series on next weekend. So stay tuned for that if that does happen. But this is my little teaser in case that does happen. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'm sure you've already let me know down in the comments section below. I don't even have to ask. But let me know what you think down in the comments section below of the Detroit race. Can we call it a race? I'll use the word race lightly because at least in the last 20 laps they did race, and Marcus Ericsson at least made it exciting. So yeah, a race at the Detroit, I almost called it Belle Isle, the downtown Detroit. Thank you guys, and we'll see you in the next video.